All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. So it has been 1 month and 4 days since I got myself an RTX 3060. You can see 3060, and I think I have used it enough to make an informed opinion about this card. And I want to form this opinion based on the context of what happened with the market of the graphics cards the past 2 years, and also based on what is available now. We have the entire 3000 series from NVIDIA, and we have the 6000 series from AMD. I'm also going to compare it to my 6900 XT. You can see it right here. It is a red devil. Yeah, so this is going to be my 1 month review of the RTX 3060. So before I go into any details, I think we should go into sort of a quick summary of what I think of this card in particular. If you are trying to buy any card from NVIDIA at the moment, in my honest opinion, this is the best model you can choose. The problem with NVIDIA cards at the moment is the mid-range. For example, 3060 Ti, 3070, 3070 Ti. All of these cards only have 8 gigabytes of memory. And for example, if you want to play modern titles like Spider-Man using ray tracing and using the maximum quality settings for textures and other effects, you're going to need a lot of video memory to do that. And it's not just Spider-Man. Spider-Man is not the first example. For example, if you wanted to play Resident Evil 2 or Resident Evil 3, even back in the day when they came out, they already required about 12 gigabytes of video memory, especially if you played at 4K. Now, many people usually told you that it was okay to use the maximum settings and you didn't have to worry about the memory. But this is not the case if you try to play the game very quickly and you start to move to the different areas of the game. So for example, if you go from the police station to the sewers, when you start loading the assets, because remember the police station is connected to the sewers, especially if you play with Leon, when you start to transition between these two levels in the game, you're going to have stuttering because of the limitations on your video memory if you exceed past the limit. We are already seeing a trend in video games today where if you go into the settings menu, it will tell you with a warning that you are exceeding your video memory limit. You have Doom Eternal, you have Resident Evil, now you have Spider-Man, which even though it doesn't tell you directly, if you exceed the video memory limit, the game is going to not perform as well. Other games that come to mind is Halo Infinite. It also has a video memory counter. Far Cry 6, Resident Evil Village. With the consoles having a lot of video memory, you're starting to see this trend in PC games where they are starting to tell you this is the video memory you're using, and if you exceed it, you're going to have problems. Now, if you think about the mid-range of NVIDIA, they have 8 gigabyte cards. This one is the odd one out. Many people did not understand why NVIDIA, for some reason, packed 12 gigabytes of video memory in this card, even though it's supposed to be sort of the cheapest option in the mid-range or even entry level. Some people thought this is entry level. And I think the reason they packed more memory into this product is because they wanted to make a card that you would keep. So the overall conclusion of what I want to talk about today is this card is a keeper. This is a card that you want to keep. If you get one, you will keep it and it will serve you well for many years because it the fact that they put 12 gigabytes of memory in it is actually making it perform some tasks that it isn't really supposed to be doing as well as it's supposed to be doing. So what am I talking about here? If you want to play something like Cyberpunk and you want to turn on the ray tracing, you can do that. You can do that on this card. And I'm not saying it's going to be completely, like 100 FPS, but it will give you exactly half of the performance of a 3090. So if you turn on the ray tracing, all the effects, reflections, shadows, lighting to medium, of course, and you adjust your settings to be sort of close to medium, at 1440p you can play Cyberpunk with this card at between 50 and 60 FPS. I'm not kidding. It is quite playable. And the reason it is quite playable is precisely because we have enough memory to handle that. The frame time graph is very smooth. It is very playable. You can actually enjoy the game. And you're using all the ray tracing effects, and this card doesn't break the bank. You're not buying something that costs $1,000. And I think that as we go into the future, you're going to see more and more games where this card is going to, again, it's not blazing fast, it's not going to beat a 3080 or a 3090, of course, but it can do it. It can play those games thanks to the memory. And the memory also plays a role if you want to edit video. I started to learn some video editing tools, and I can tell you that having the extra memory helps a lot. If you want to start doing some CUDA workloads, you want to learn some AI, you want to learn some TensorFlow, the 12 gigabytes of VRAM are more than enough for fitting a lot of work into this card. It can do the job, and it will not crash. The other good part of this card is that it uses very little power. So this part uses 170 watts. This is peak. My model, the colorful BattleAx, is the cheapest model Colorful has, and this model doesn't let me raise the power limit. You can get a more expensive model, you can get higher power limit, but I don't think it makes any sense to make it use more power. You don't need that. This card by itself uses a single 8-pin power connector. That means you can use any power supply you have lying around. Most PCs already come with a power supply with at least one PCIe power connector, which means you can use this card. You can put it in and it will work just fine. And the performance you get, which I will get into in a later part of the video about the performance, but the performance you get on this card for a single 8-pin power connector is very impressive. And the thing I want to mention is that this card had a bit of a lukewarm reception in terms of performance. Many people said, okay, so this card performs like last gen, 20 RTX 2070, 2060 Super, 5700 XT. But a lot of those reviews were only looking at the raster performance. Now, of course, raster is king when it comes to gaming, but in my experience, if you want to use 100% of this card, really utilize it to its full potential, you need to take into account how it performs operations with the Tensor hardware. So that means you need to also be considering heavily how it performs using the LSS. Now, later when I get to the performance, we're going to see that this card performs way above its weight when you start to use the LSS. And, for what it is, which is, this is supposed to be a $350 card. I got it for that price. This is basically half of a 3090. You look at any benchmark which has a 3090 in it, just take half of that number, that is the 3060. And I think this is quite impressive. You know, if you were happy with the performance of a 3090, you know, it gives you 4K 120, this one will do 4K 60, and you're not breaking the bank, you know. Double the price of this, it doesn't get you a 3090, you know. So that is the quick conclusion. Now I'm going to go into more details. So let's start. So what do I mean as a keeper? I mean, this is a card that if you get it, you're going to want to keep it. Best things I can compare this to in terms of video cards is maybe the GTX 1060, the RX 580. In terms of CPUs, I can compare it to the 7700K, 8700K, you know, maybe the Ryzen 3600. You know, I'm talking about parts where if you got it, you really didn't need to change anything. It just works. I believe that the 3060 is the card you should be looking at if you want to buy a GPU. You shouldn't be looking at anything higher than this card. You don't need it. And I will explain in the process of this video. So there are three main aspects I want to focus on. Number one is the ease of use. Second is the longevity. And lastly, it is the performance. You know, you need to buy a product which does the thing you want. Now, I think one aspect that isn't covered a lot is how easy it is to use a graphics card these days. And it makes sense because, you know, usually if you want to buy something like an RTX 3080 or a 3090, you sort of expect the user to be in the enthusiast category. So, you know, reviewers do not focus on that part a lot, but I think it is important that I talk about it here. So there is one thing with high-end products, especially recently, where the power consumption is increasing by magnitudes we have never seen before. If you look at the 3080, which was the most popular NVIDIA card of the 3000 series when it was announced, that card is already using 320 watts. Now, the issue is that, you know, many people who are starting to get into PC gaming, especially due to the pandemic, or who are trying to start to build their own computers for the first time, it is very easy to focus on the performance. You see the performance of a 3080 or the performance of a 3090, which is very impressive. They are very fast, especially at 4K. You know, many people go for those parts because that is the performance they want at 4K. Now, this is fine, of course. If you're an enthusiast or a professional and you need a 3080 or a 3090 to do something, right? Professional Fortnite player, professional video editor, which needs the 3090, you already know what you're buying. Essentially, you are specifically the target audience for that product. But many people who are just starting out, you know, they're learning from Reddit, from YouTube, how to build computers. I don't think they have experienced what it is to build a computer with a high-end part with a big TDP. Personally, for me, the top limit as to where I am comfortable is about 300 watts of TDP. I had a Radeon 7, I have the 6900 XT, both of which had a 300 watt TDP. And I can tell you that if you buy a card which has high TDP, it's not as simple as you put it in your case and you're done. You're buying a high-end part and you need to take care of that high-end part. It needs a certain level of user care and tuning in order to run well. That high power consumption produces a lot of heat. That heat can go into your PC case, it can go into your room, it can suddenly increase the temperatures of your CPU, suddenly increase the temperatures of your SSDs. It can cause problems in your computer. Many people can tell you, oh, you just buy a better case, you buy more fans, you adjust the configuration of your system, which is correct. I mean, you will need to learn those things when you buy a high-end card. You know, basically how to keep the card well. It's like buying a high-end car. car, except you're not running it in the city. You know, if you're playing a game at 4K on a 3090, it is going full speed. If you're going to be running a sports car at full speed, you better have a good mechanic. This is my point. I think for the vast majority of people who have not experienced 300 watts of heat, I do not recommend you buy a 300 watt card. I seriously do not. You will experience levels of noise and heat that you have never experienced before. I'm serious. The computer can become a heater, essentially. If you live in a very cold place, maybe you will like it. If you live in a place with a very warm summer, you're going to hate it. I'm serious. This is the warning I'm going to give to you now. So where does the 3060 come in? So as I mentioned, it is half the performance of a 3090 about. The magic thing about this card is it only pulls 170 watts of power. It only has one 8-pin power connector. You can put it in basically any system. Any system that has an 8-pin power connector, it can take it. The heat output of this card is so low compared to the 3080, 3090. It doesn't output a lot of heat. It's not a lot of power. Even if you compare it to an Xbox Series X, total system power consumption, you're about the same TDP as a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series X. You keep it in a PC case, it will be quiet. It's going to be silent. You're not going to hear this card. Even if it's using its full potential, you're not going to hear it. You're not going to need to reconfigure your computer a lot to accommodate for the heat output. The card is just going to run well for you, and it's usually going to give you the top performance it can give you without a lot of tinkering, underbolting, overclocking, whatever. You don't need to do any of that. This is one of the biggest pluses of getting the 3060. But for this reason, I believe this card obtains the best ease of use score out of all possible options right now. There are basically little compromises here. So now I want to talk about longevity and value of this card. So by longevity, I mean in the future, how much can you expect out of this card if you keep it for, let's say, 4 or 5 years? What this card has going for it is that it is perfectly balanced. So thanks to the 12 gigabytes of memory, at the moment, if you play at 1440p or at 4K, you know, this card is perfectly capable of playing at 4K. You can use basically maximum textures at the moment. You don't need to turn them down. You know, as we go forward, games are going to start using more and more memory. And if you have a card with only 6 gigabytes or 8 gigabytes of memory, you're already seeing that problem. You need to turn down some settings, especially if you want to use ray tracing. If we take into account that the consoles, the PS5 and the Xbox Series X are going to be the standard for running games for a very long time. We're talking still another 3 or 4 years, maybe even more, due to the current situation in the economy and everything. The 3060 is basically matching what the PS5 can do, because remember, PS5 is still using upscaling to achieve 4K a lot of the time. And when you have like for like, you know, 3060 doing 4K with DLSS, which is, you know, the 3060 has the hardware dedicated to do this task, which is that DLSS anti-aliasing. You know, it really can match the PS5 in those instances, and with DLSS it will look really good. So what this means for us, right, is that if you're going to play raster only, you're going to at least match the PS5. This is no question about it. We are starting to see more and more the biggest hits of the holidays already coming out with support for really high quality upscalers, either DLSS or FSR 2.0. With those upscalers, this card can do 4K no problem. If you're playing at 1440p, then this card is perfect for that. It was designed for that. I personally think 4K is a little expensive now. Not a lot of people can afford a 4K screen or a 4K TV, but 1440p, you can buy a really good monitor right now. They're not very expensive. 1440p 165 Hz. You can find them for $200, $250 at a sale. Start using this card, no problem. You're gonna do 1440p 120 Hz. Any game you want. If you turn on ray tracing, you can do 1440p 60. Usually maxing out ray tracing. It depends on the game. If you're playing Cyberpunk, like I showed you, you can adjust the settings. It will be enjoyable. Doom Eternal, you can do 1440p 120Hz with ray tracing. It is doable. This card will do it. You will not miss out on that experience if that is what you want to do. It is extremely capable at that resolution, and it is not expensive. You can have that set up right now, and you know, I think it's going to last a long time. Even now you can see the GTX 1060 can play very well at 1080p. This card does extremely well at 1440p. It's not struggling. You don't need to turn down setting, and I don't expect that we will see that until we are out of this generation of consoles, which is going to last a long time. And even after that, I am sure this card will still have a lot of value thanks to that extra memory and the fact that it is already compliant with all the new technologies we're going to be seeing in the Xbox and the PS5. Direct storage, variable rate shading, all of those features are already in this card. HDMI 2.1, you buy an LG OLED down the line for your living room, you can take this card, put it in a small form factor PC, you're done. It will drive that display. So I think in terms of longevity, this card is very well equipped. In many instances, you know, even for example the Radeon 6600, it is comparable. But I think that in terms of true longevity, you know, putting all cards on the table, this card wins. Not just because of the extra memory, but I think it is because you have a little bit more options thanks to the support of DLSS, and also because if you ever want to try your hand at video editing or streaming, this card is perfect for that. It is designed for that. This is why I'm going to give it a really high score for longevity. Okay, so it's time to talk about performance, which I think is the part that a lot of you have been waiting for. I think it's a good idea that we look at the render configuration of the RTX 3060. So that render configuration is very similar to that of the GTX 1080 Ti. If you take a look, we have the same amount of CUDA cores, which is 3584. The reason they chose this number is no accident. I mean, the 1080 Ti was a legendary card. I mean, basically, if you still have a 1080 Ti today, you don't have any problems running anything at 1440p, even at 4K. The new thing coming with the 3060 is of course the tensor cores. Now we have 112 tensor cores, which are the second generation. And so you have to remember, when we are comparing the 1080 Ti to the 3060, right, we do have the same number of CUDA cores. If you want to make use of the full capabilities of the 3060, you have to not only use all those CUDA cores, you also have to use the tensor cores as well. This is the point I want to make in this video. If you're running pure rasterization, the 3060 is very similar to the 1080 Ti. If you play some games on both cards, you will notice very little differences. The 1080 Ti will win in games where the memory bandwidth is concerned. We have lower memory bandwidth on the 3060 compared to the 1080 Ti. Sometimes, thanks to that memory bandwidth, the 1080 Ti is going to be a bit faster. But we can make up for that if we make use of the tensor hardware to perform the anti-aliasing. That is the point I want to make in this video. So I think this is a very nice baseline. So if you look up numbers of the 1080 Ti right now, it is still very capable. It will run anything very well. Even at 4K, you can play games at 4K, no problem, even racing games. At 1440p, the 1080 Ti is still amazing. You can play basically anything, 1440p, 120Hz, it can still do it. If that baseline is just raster performance, the 3060 can do it as well. But since we have the tensor hardware, we can scale a bit more in the modern games if we use DLSS. For the rest of the video, I'm just going to show you clips, real clips of my own gameplay with the 3060. I was not benchmarking, you know, I had some stuff running in the background, just the normal way I would play games. I just recorded a clip of several different games, and I want you to take a look at how smooth everything runs. Every game is going to show you the settings. Have a look at that, and then we will end up with a final conclusion at the end. So catch you later. I think we can do a whole lot of gaming on the 3060. So here's where I want to talk about my 6900 XT. So this card is doing about half of the performance, at least in raster, of the 6900 XT. And that is a very drastic difference indeed in terms of raw performance. But here's the thing, with the 6900 XT in pure raster, I was getting 200 FPS, right, with my i7, 200 FPS, or even hitting the 165 cap of my monitor, which is great, of course. However, at times it felt like I had too much power. There were games like Death Stranding where the anti-aliasing at 1440p is not very good. You would always see some shimmering in the vegetation and in the buildings. And what I would end up doing in a lot of games with the 6900 XT was using super sampling. So I would run the game at 4K and then downscale it to 1440p. So what I noticed with the 3060 is when I have DLSS available, now that we are almost 4 years, I think, into the technology, where NVIDIA is still investing money, still improving the technology and the image quality. I looked at games like Death Stranding, and with DLSS the problem was completely gone. The anti-aliasing just works extremely well with DLSS. If I use DLSS, the 3060 performs basically like a 6700 XT-ish, scales up to about another 20-25%. When I'm using this card, which is very small, it uses little power, and when you have access to DLSS, the image quality is greatly improved. I don't miss the 6900 XT that much. I have to admit it, the image quality is great. It truly looks super sampled if you're using the DLSS quality preset. If you use DLSS performance preset, the image still looks quite good to me, to be honest. I know a lot of people don't like that preset. For me, in many games it looks really good, man, and I know they are improving the performance and the image quality. NVIDIA is still working on this. So when you put those things together, my conclusion is that this card, with the 12 gigabytes of VRAM and with the performance, the raster performance of a 1080 Ti plus the tensor cores, I just think this is perfectly balanced. It is a perfectly balanced video card. It doesn't crash. It can run. You want ray tracing with good frame times, it will do it. It would do it thanks to the memory. Here is the point I want to say, is my personal opinion. But if you have an 8 gigabyte card right now, either Radeon or NVIDIA, you are going to upgrade soon. The fact that you have only 8 gigabytes is already a limitation. It is very strict now with the newer games. And I'm afraid that one day you run into something where the card doesn't perform as well as you want it to, simply because you're running out of RAM. If you have a 3060 Ti, I think you will probably be compelled to upgrade before someone that has a 3060. Now, the enthusiast who has a 3080 or 3090, these are very nice cards, but they use a ton of heat, man. 340 watts and up. An enthusiast knows how to keep a card very well. They can tune it, underbolt it, whatever, they know exactly how to keep the card. But an enthusiast also is going to try to go to the next piece of hardware. So they're going to be looking at RTX 4000. They are not really looking into keeping the card, in my opinion. I don't think many people will try to keep those high-end video cards when the next generation is going to be a huge leap in performance. People who only game and keep 3080s, I believe they are also possibly going to replace that card in the future very soon as well. Not because the cards are bad, but because they want the next thing. Some people are also going to be tired of the heat. They will try to either go 4070 next generation or try to lower the TDP. Here is where this card lands, right? Is this for enthusiasts? Is it for the normal user? Who is this card for? The best way I can describe it is, for example, if you have a high-end card, 3080, 3090, right? And you want to replace it, you sell it and you want to wait for the next thing, you put this card in your system, you're gonna be happy, man. It's going to not only run your display, you're gonna be impressed how much stuff you can play with this. It plays things very well. And for the normal user looking for value, you put this card in your system, you're going to be very pleasantly surprised. Just like I was. I am enjoying playing a whole lot of games. Old games, new games, anything goes. The card is completely silent, uses very little power. You know, I keep repeating these things, but I'm telling you, it is very impressive what it can do. You know, this card had a very rough debut, came out, it was overpriced, and now that the dust has settled and you're able to get these at MSRP, I'm not going to tell you to go buy this right now. I needed a CUDA accelerator, so I bought this. I'm just telling you my experience. I'm not giving you financial advice, but what I'm going to tell you is that if you buy this, and if you buy it at the MSRP, this is the card you would keep out of the bunch because it will run anything fine. It's not terribly fast, but it will do it. That's all I wanted to tell you in this video. I'm sorry it was so long. It took a long time to prepare and edit, so if you like my video, please give me a like and a subscribe. I promise you I will not make videos this long the next time. So that's going to be all from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video, okay? Bye bye.